This is a very ad hoc documentation office hours. We've been at a 2-week sprint here in Madrid, which has just finished. Most people are leaving for the airport. So we just thought we'd try and squeeze in one office hours and say hello to everyone before the weekend. Katana's bravely offered to talk a little bit about something. And of course, we're here to answer your questions as well afterwards. So I'm going to hand it over to Katana.
Yeah, thank you, Graham. And yeah, the brave souls who have gathered in the last minute of this sprint event. So yeah, this is just something that I thought would be interesting to share that I actually experienced today. I rather had an interesting meeting while defining the scope for creating a tutorial. So I just thought it's like something that's worth sharing. So I put a few points together in a slide. Let me just try to present that. Okay. There we go. So this is what was my thinking when I entered a meeting today. So our purpose was to just create a tutorial for a particular feature that was developed newly in my product. And the scope definition went something like this. So when you discuss about the feature, it was about, okay, the feature should do this, it should enable this and kind of allow users to do a certain task. And of course, it should not cause regressions. Fair enough, right? It was simple enough. But when we started discussing about what the tutorial should do, the list of requirements was like growing, and I have just listed a few interesting ones here. So it was like, teach the user to do that. Okay, can we do that in the format of a video? Can we sell the product somehow, kind of show how we are different from the competition? And it went on and on. At least that was my vantage point. So when the requirement list kept growing, it became, as a technical author, it became a bit confusing to focus on what the feature is about and what exactly the tutorial should do. So to avoid that pitfall, this is what I kind of did. So it's all valid vantage points. You have to, as a documentation writer or a technical author, you kind of have to cater to the suggestions of engineers, user experience designers, sometimes web developers, if the feature is on a web interface. But it's all valid. It just needs a little bit of channelizing and filtering. So here's what I did, and I think I succeeded, at least, because at the end of a meeting we were all agreeing on one particular way to do the tutorial. So understanding the different vantage points kind of helped, but not giving up on the documentation principles. For example, we follow diet access at Canonical, so that guidance kind of helped me and explain and reiterate the purpose for my team members. So in this case, this can basically be applied to any topic type, like if you're developing a how-to guide or an explanation, anything. But in this case, it was a tutorial. So what a tutorial is supposed to do. So which is just teach the user to do a particular task that they can complete, basically. So what I navigated the conversation to define the focus of that tutorial. So what is it that we want to tell the user? So pick one easy, simple, and most importantly, the safest goal that we can allow the user to try out, kind of do it along with the tutorial and feel an accomplishment by the end of it, right? And so when you kind of eliminate or resist that temptation to get everything into this one tutorial, okay, yeah, this is a great feature that we have developed, but there are other ways to kind of add on, like everything else can follow on as separate how-to guides or even optional or advanced tutorials. But when you are introducing a feature for the first time, even if it is something really big, resist that temptation and stay away from marketing, at least for now. And demonstrate the importance of like being there for the user. So like if you go through the guidance of diet access, I remember reading that like you are obligated to be present when you are teaching the user through a tutorial, but you're condemned to be absent because you cannot be there in person. So that is kind of the crux of a tutorial, I think. So if the user is genuinely interested in the feature, if you show that you're there and if you give them that accomplishment, the feeling of accomplishment by the end of the tutorial, I think a good byproduct of that process is that they are actually sold on the product and they're interested in the feature. They want to try out more. So that happens automatically. So like I said, this can apply to any topic type. It just happened to be a tutorial in my case. And in the end, our plan looked simply like this. After like an hour or so of discussion, this was just the plan. So this seemed simple enough, or sometimes too simple for an hour of discussion. But at least now everyone were on the same page about like, okay, what is it that we want to do? We want to teach the user how to do like how to create a simple application using the product. And then we had follow-up plans for more advanced tutorial, which can be optional depending on the use case. How to do this, like configure, take that feedback, and then like do something else. So to reach this, there's a lot of discussions involved, but the guidelines of or the focus on the topic type and what the end user needs really helped. So this was a very interesting meeting that I had today. Like we had, like I said, we had engineers, we had like web developers, we had user people from user research, user design. So it was very interesting to see how different people come at a feature from different angle. For example, the designer kind of focused on selling the feature and highlighting how we are better than the competition. The engineers were more focused on how they wanted to let the user know about everything that a particular feature of the product can do. So as a technical author, I think it's important to kind of keep our mind, our role in the mind, and navigate the team. And that's basically all I had.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Kitana. I've got a question or two. Maybe if anybody else wants to ask any questions, please feel free. My first one is actually, at what stage do you think that a set of documentation needs a tutorial? Is this something that you felt was missing from the project that you're working on? And my second question is kind of related to that. Is it ever acceptable to have a tutorial that includes things that aren't documented elsewhere in the documentation set?
Okay, so for the first part, in our case at least, we have had this feature as experimental, declared experimental for a while, because we wanted to gauge the interest. We were getting constant inputs from field and support, like how people are using this. So if it is a very straightforward feature, I would have started doing this right from the beginning, probably just introduce a tutorial when the feature was introduced. But this was something that required that feedback loop to be complete. So we waited a couple of releases or a couple months to kind of see how much interest is there and what kind of interest is there. So that kind of defined the roadmap of the product itself. So a couple months later, after we introduced this as an experimental feature, we started thinking about this tutorial. So that's basically the answer. The second part is I fully didn't get it. So
Yeah.
What was your second question?
Well, sometimes when working with teams, they're very keen to have a tutorial because it's like a great landing page for people who are searching for a project and want to get a taste of what a project's like. But they'll often want this before they've kind of fully completed all elements of the documentation even referred to in the how-to. And I just wondered what you thought about this, whether everything that's going to be in the tutorial is documented elsewhere in this documentation set, and whether you personally think it would be okay for a tutorial to kind of cover some things that aren't otherwise explained in the rest of the documentation.
Okay, so I try to avoid that. I will admit that there are instances where I have had to kind of point the users to say that, okay, for this particular step, you can already, you can follow the instructions that are already documented here, but I try to avoid that if possible, because to keep the users focus in that particular tutorial end to end is what I feel is important for the learning experience and for them to not click and be distracted. Uh, but I wouldn't like go so far as to like condemn it or like totally avoid it. Like if for the sake of not repeating the same information, I would do that.
Was were you meaning that you wondered whether it was acceptable to have stuff that was in the tutorial but not reference other plates?
Yeah.
If I can have a quick go at answering that, I think it all depends on the product and the development stage of the product. A lot of times when we're developing new stuff that hasn't had a full release or what have you, you do want, like for the early adopters and the people you're relying on testing things, you do want to give them a guide to follow to how they can, quickly spin up something or try something. But you also have to bear in mind that the thing that they're trying may reconfigure itself many times as the journey goes along. And actually, it's actually really a good trick to have a team, a development team, as well as a writer focused on, like, we must keep this thing must always work and must always be up to date, because otherwise, you can get lots of drift in different parts of the documentation. So I think I think it is okay to have stuff in there that isn't already covered.
That was a good argument. Does anybody else have any feelings on this? Or want to ask Katana anything about the tutorial? Well, thanks, Katana. That was really useful. I explained earlier on, this is all a bit ad hoc, so I didn't expect it to go on too long. But if anybody has anything else they'd like to bring up, related to documentation in general, or documentation at Canonical, or the Academy, then please ask. So Iqbal is asking about the tutorials. Go ahead. So how do you integrate basic and advanced tutorials? I don't know if you want to try and answer that one, Kitana, because I saw that you had the split on that slide.
Yeah. So this is basically, to think about integrating, you don't really have to try hard. You just categorize it that way and kind of list it. If there is an order to performing those tutorials, you make sure that you list the order, you mention that whether it's optional or not. So many new users would just go for the basic tutorials, and the advanced tutorials would only be for technical users. So I think they would really at least know their way around the product. So if you just call that out, and kind of the advanced tutorial will still try to teach the user to do certain tasks, but it might just be a bit more complicated, or it might take the example of a bit more complicated use case. Does that answer your question?
So Iqbal says, then isn't there now completely different tutorials that need to be synced with every significant update? Yeah. That feels like too much of a mental overhead.
Yeah, so I think I need to clarify what I meant by advanced, maybe. So the feature that you take as an example, so the tutorial is to do a specific task, right? Let's say I need to create and stream an application via a cloud service. So I would call that as a basic tutorial. Let's say I would want more, I'm actually, there are different types of images on which that you can build the application on. So you are taking a more complicated image where you have to configure a lot of settings, and then you have to teach the user to install the application, and then kind of configure the settings that are required to stream it, and then stream it and do further steps. So if that is the case, I would say that's an advance. So it can end up being a superset depending on your product. It can end up being a superset of your basic tutorials where you can refer to the previous tutorials as well. But this is just not like two totally different things. They go hand in hand with each other, but they will deal with two different examples. So that's what I meant.
That makes sense to me. Demilola says, so let's assume there's a need to have a basic and an advanced tutorial. Is it safe to have both of them within the same section of the documentation? I don't know if anybody else wants to try answering that rather than putting Katana on the spot every time. I mean, I'm going to say yes, but I don't know if you want to say more, Katana.
No, I mean, I also agree. And I'm doing the same thing with my product stocks. It's just that I make sure to call out what is required for that, like a very detailed prerequisite sections and a disclaimer at the top, like what is required, what knowledge is required to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think as long as you're making the expectations clear in the tutorials, which you should always do anyway, that it's fine to have them in the same area. Probably useful.
Yeah, I have to say they're kind of dismantling part of this room while we're sitting here.
Literally going to come and carry the screen away in a minute.
So yeah, I think if you have any more questions, please feel free to leave them on the in the forum or in the Matrix chat. Special thank you to Katana for putting that together in the presentation. It's actually really late where she is now, so thanks so much for doing that, Katana, and also for you guys turning up as well, because you know it's after hours here. And as ever, thank you everyone else for attending. We'll be back to normal. I promise we'll get a schedule online in the week to be able to make these more predictable. But otherwise, hope you all have a great weekend, and we'll see you again next week. So thank you very much. Okay, bye.